Sometimes we hear people say Pope Pius XII should have done more to help Jews during World War II. Well, a German bishop asked Pius about that during the war, and Pius replied that he didn't think angry denunciations would do much good, that Hitler was determined to kill the Jews and nothing was going to stop him, and that criticism would just make Hitler so angry that he would kill lots of Catholics in reprisal. Pius decided he wasn't going to risk the lives of Catholics in order to save Jews. You can read about this conversation on page 570 of a book called The Years of Extermination, Nazi Germany and the Jews, 1939 to 1945, by a history professor named Saul Friedlander, who is considered one of the world's leading experts on the Holocaust. Friedlander has looked into the question of Pius's behavior during the Holocaust and has concluded that, of course, nobody can read Pius's mind, but it is certainly possible that Pius sincerely believed that public criticism would accomplish little or nothing useful, and sincerely believed that Hitler would retaliate by killing Gentile Catholics, by ordering his thugs to arrest and kill Catholic Jews and Catholic half-Jews in Italy and elsewhere, and by thoroughly searching convents, monasteries, and churches in Italy for Jews who were being hidden there by priests and nuns. Friedlander's estimate is that at least hundreds and maybe even thousands of Jews were hidden in Italian churches, convents, and monasteries during the war. You can read about Friedlander's analysis of this issue on pages 569 through 573 of his book, The Years of Extermination. Friedlander has also concluded that in Hungary, the Catholic Archbishop and the Protestant leaders were able to protect the Christian Jews precisely because they refrained from complaining when the other Jews were rounded up and sent to death camps. You can read about that on page 620 of Friedlander's book, The Years of Extermination. Daniel J. Goldhagen, the most vehement critic of Pope Pius XII, has no logical answer to that theory. On page 54 of his book, A Moral Reckoning, he insists that there is no reason to believe the Pope's silence saved anyone, but he fails to discuss the idea that Friedlander has explained, that Hitler would have responded to criticism by killing Catholic Gentiles, by killing Catholic Jews and Catholic half-Jews, and by searching convents, monasteries, and churches for hidden Jews. Apparently, Goldhagen cannot bear to even consider that possibility. On page 50 of A Moral Reckoning, Goldhagen discusses the time when the Nazis in the Netherlands started arresting Jews and sending them to concentration camps. The Catholic and Protestant bishops told the Nazi governor that they would publicly condemn this action if he didn't stop. The Nazi governor replied that if they publicly condemned it, he would retaliate by killing all the Catholic and Protestant Jews in the Netherlands. In the face of this threat, the Protestant bishops backed down. But the Catholic bishops went ahead with their public statement of condemnation, and, in retaliation, all the Catholic Jews in the Netherlands were arrested and sent to Auschwitz the very next day. Obviously, that proves that condemning Hitler's actions was a very dangerous thing to do. But Goldhagen says this incident proves nothing. He says the Protestant Jews were eventually arrested and killed, even though the Dutch Protestant bishops kept silent. I don't understand his logic. It seems to me he's missing the point. One would think, logically, that Nazi policy would have been the same everywhere in Europe, but it is a simple historical fact that in some countries, Christian Jews were arrested and killed, and in others they were left alone. Because of the uncertainty about whether Nazi policy might change at any moment, it was perfectly reasonable for Pius to be afraid that if he made this or that statement, the Nazis might retaliate against the Catholic Jews and Catholic half-Jews in Italy or other countries. Is Goldhagen really going to sit there and say he is absolutely certain that Pius shouldn't have been afraid of that? Is Goldhagen really going to say he is absolutely certain that public condemnations by the Pope would not have provoked some ghastly retaliation by Hitler? I don't see how anyone can feel certain about such a thing. One must keep in mind that between September 1939 and June 1941, the Nazis murdered approximately 20% of the Catholic priests in the part of Poland that they ruled. You can read about this on pages 22 through 27 of a book called The Catholic Church and the Holocaust, 1930 to 1965, by a history professor named Michael Phayer. Phayer is spelled P as in Pennsylvania, H-A-Y-E-R, if you want to look up his books in your local library. It would have been easy for the Nazis to raise that percentage from 20% to 30% or 40% or whatever. When Pius XII sent a letter to Hitler complaining about Nazi brutality in Poland, the only response he got was a letter from the German foreign minister saying, basically, "Shut up or we'll make the situation worse." Pius XII complained publicly a few times about the Nazis' brutality in Poland, but he certainly didn't make a big deal out of it. He never ordered German Catholics to desert from the army and refuse to serve in the German occupation of Poland. Why? Because he was afraid that loud complaints would just provoke some horrible retaliation from Hitler, and that, obviously, is also the reason why he made no loud complaints about Hitler murdering the Jews. Thousands of Catholic priests, nuns, and Protestant pastors were arrested in Germany by Hitler, even before the war began. Does Goldhagen have any theory about why that happened? Has he not, at least, heard of the famous Lutheran clergyman Martin Niemöller, who spent 8 years in the Dachau concentration camp and was freed only when the war ended? In May 1936, Niemöller and some of his friends sent Hitler a letter demanding an end to government interference in their churches. Hitler responded to this by arresting hundreds of Niemöller's followers and confiscating their organization's money. You can read about this on pages 149 through 156 of a book called 20th Century Germany, The Nightmare Years, 1930 to 1940, by William Shirer. Shirer is spelled S as in Sam, H-I-R-E-R, if you want to look up that book in your local library. Shirer was an American journalist who covered Nazi Germany for CBS Radio News. Is Goldhagen going to be honest enough to admit that Hitler did all those things because he wouldn't tolerate even the slightest criticism? You have to remember, Hitler had 2,762 German Christian clergymen and nuns arrested and locked up in the Dachau concentration camp. A third of them died there. You can read about this in an article written by the famous historian Istvan Diak in the November 5, 2001 issue of New Republic magazine. You can also go to Wikipedia and read about a group of young Germans who called themselves the White Rose. They were arrested and put to death just for handing out a few anti-Nazi pamphlets. Hitler was not the kind of man who was willing to tolerate criticism. And yet Goldhagen sits there and insists that Hitler would not have retaliated if Pius had criticized him. In 1934, 4 prominent German Catholics, Erich Klausner, Adalbert Probst, Fritz Gerlich, and Fritz Beck, were arrested and shot because they had criticized Hitler. You can read about this on pages 124 and 169 through 171 of a book called The Catholic Church and Nazi Germany by the famous historian Günter Levy. Neither the Pope nor the German bishops complained about these murders of Klausner, Probst, Gerlich, and Beck. Why? Because they were afraid that if they did, Hitler would just get angry and commit even more murders. In the same way, they did not complain when Jews were killed. They were afraid complaints would just make things worse. Was it horrible that Pius XII did not want to risk the lives of Catholics in order to save Jews? Bill Clinton did the same thing when he was president during the genocide in Rwanda. He wasn't going to send American troops to risk their lives just to save a bunch of Rwandans. Few people criticized Clinton for this. The Democrats renominated Clinton for president 2 years later without any opposition. And Barack Obama did the same thing when the Syrian dictator was committing mass murder in Syria. Obama wasn't going to risk the lives of American troops just to save a bunch of Syrians. Few people in the Democratic Party criticized him for this. His popularity among Democrats continues to be very high. If you're going to condemn Pope Pius XII, then you're going to have to condemn Clinton and Obama too. They did the same thing. And look at Guatemala. The Guatemalan government murdered 200,000 peasants during the 1980s. Did Israel do anything about that atrocity? I'm not even talking about military intervention. Did the Israeli government even go to the UN and propose a weapons embargo against the Guatemalan government? No, the Israelis did nothing of the sort. On the contrary, the Israeli government sold weapons to the Guatemalan government. The Israeli government actually helped the Guatemalan government commit mass murder. You can read about this in an editorial in the January 13, 1982 issue of the New York Times, and in an article in the December 17, 1982 issue of the New York Times. Isn't that something? Goldhagen rants on and on about how evil he thinks Pius XII was, but he also wrote a book about genocide called Worse Than War, and he talks quite a bit in that book about the mass murder in Guatemala during the 1980s, but he never criticizes Israel for selling weapons to the murderers. He never even mentions it. He'll criticize the Pope all day long, but he'll never criticize Israel for doing something far worse. It is amazing that any man could be such a flagrant hypocrite. As I said earlier, Goldhagen wrote a book called A Moral Reckoning, and on page 307 of that book, he talks about a town in France called La Chambon. The people in that town hid 3,000 Jews from the Nazis. Goldhagen says Pope Pius XII should have ordered every Catholic priest in Hitler's empire to do the same. But the truth is that the people in La Chambon were in an unusual situation. There was a local Gestapo official who warned the mayor of La Chambon whenever there was going to be a Gestapo raid on the town to search for Jews. Also, the local French police helped the people of La Chambon cover up the truth about what they were doing. So the people of La Chambon were not in much danger. You can read about this in an article by John Gray in the November 25, 2013 issue of New Republic magazine. But in Poland, and in some of the other places that Hitler ruled, the penalty for helping a Jew was death. You can read about that on page 535 of Saul Freelander's book, The Years of Extermination. Doesn't Goldhagen know that Victor Kugler, the man who hid Anne Frank and her family, was arrested and sent to a concentration camp? He survived only by luck. Furthermore, there were food shortages in the countries Hitler ruled. You can read about that on pages 282 and 283 of a book called The Abandonment of the Jews, America and the Holocaust, 1941 to 1945, by David Wyman. So even if you were brave enough to hide Jews, how on earth were you going to feed them? Goldhagen never thinks about that. A Dutch lady named Corrie ten Boom saved many Jews. Her name is spelled C-O-R-R-I-E space T-E-N space B as in boy O-O-M if you want to look her up in Wikipedia. The Wikipedia article says she was able to save all those Jews because she had a friend in the food rationing office who gave her extra ration cards. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to do it. But like I said at the beginning, the main point is that Pius XII wasn't going to order people to risk their lives. The whole time he was Pope, he never ordered anyone to risk his or her life. After the war, when the communists took over the Catholic countries of Eastern Europe, he did not order the Catholics to revolt against the communist governments, even though he hated communism, because he didn't want to get them all killed. He didn't even order the young Catholic men to dodge the draft, because the penalty for draft dodging in the communist countries was death. That principle, that he wasn't going to order people to risk their lives, is what guided him when he was Pope. He did risk his own life, however. Even Goldhagen admits, on page 43 of his book, A Moral Reckoning, that when some German generals in 1940 told Pius XII that they wanted to overthrow Hitler and asked him to relay a message for them to the British, Pius did it. Think about that. Pius XII assisted a conspiracy to overthrow Hitler. Obviously, if Hitler and Mussolini had found out about that, they would have been very angry, and who knows what they would have done.